All men can see these tactics whereby I conquer. But what none can see is the strategy out of which victory is evolved. Sunsha, what is your retirement strategy? That's what we're going to talk about today on the Retirement Answer Man Show. My name is Roger Whitney. Welcome to the show. This is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but truly rock retirement. And so this entire month, we are exploring how do we make better decisions consistently. And we want to talk strategy today. And the reason we want to talk strategy is we live in a very tactical world, especially as you're coming towards retirement, because the systems and the decisions that you made for your life during the accumulation phase all need to be revisited. You got to figure out what to do with your 401k, how you're going to create a paycheck, how you're going to invest to be able to create a paycheck, what you're going to do when you wake up every morning. All of a sudden, all these decisions need to be remade, and they're right up in your face. They're in your face. And so we have to make these tactical decisions on all sorts of things. And it can be dangerous to simply focus on tactical decisions. Because where do I move my 401k? That's a tactical decision that you're going to have to face. And that's going to be the trigger for you to examine that issue because you haven't had to think about it forever. You've been working. So perhaps you go look at institutions to move the money to, or you talk to your advisor, or you talk to friends and what they did, and then you make the tactical decision. Do I leave it at the 401k, or do you move it? And if so, where? Here's the problem with tactical decision making. Tactical decision making is like walking through a grocery store when you're really, really, really hungry. You have an immediate need and you just start grabbing stuff that looks good. But when you get to checkout, you got the ho-hos, you got the hummus, you got the carrots, you got the brown mustard. None of those tactical decisions you made through the aisles that looked good at the time really fit together to make a meal. That's the danger of tactics. And I find myself having to address this not just with clients over and over, but in the club when we're discussing issues, because tactics are the motivator, but we have to back up a little bit because really what we need to have is a process to create a strategy. And if we do those two things first, the tactics will evolve from that. The tactical decisions will actually become much easier to make if we put first things first, and it will all come together to make a beautiful meal, in this case, to serve you in creating the life that you want in retirement. The hard part is, when you have a tactical decision to make, you just want to make it and move on because you're busy. And so almost everyone doesn't find a process and doesn't go through the time of creating the strategy to make a more thoughtful decision on the tactic. And we need to do that. Let's go back to that, where do I move my 401k example? A good example is I had this a couple of years ago. We built an overall strategy, and when we examined the 401k, we agreed that rather than roll that entirely to an IRA, that we would keep a good portion of the money in the 401k, but roll part of it out for better selection purposes because the 401k didn't have great options, but we left a large sum of money in the 401k because they had an insured stable value fund that was yielding like 3%, which is higher than anything we ever would have got. And if we had rolled it all out of the 401k, we would never be able to get that again. So the tactical decision was born from the overall strategy and ultimately created a better solution. So how do we create strategy? Well, we're going to talk with a buddy of mine that is a wonderful strategic thinker, and hopefully this will help you back up a little bit and start to build your strategy so you can make better decisions. So I have to admit something. I got to disclose something. I'm a little biased in my opinion of Dan Miller, who we're going to speak with. He is the author of 48 Days to the Work You Love, and it just came out with its 20th anniversary edition, which is now 48 Days to the Work and Life You Love. Dan Miller and I met about 7 years ago, 7 years ago. And I am a member of a small group, probably about 25 of us, that we meet weekly on a Zoom call. And we go meet quarterly at a retreat for a day and a half to walk life together and spend time thinking about life and business and a lot of things. And he has been crucial to me personally in a lot of strategic thinking, because he's really helped me build a strategy to navigate the extraction from my partnership and still being honorable and having good friendships with my former partners. If you ever had a partnership, you know that can be difficult. Through a lot of what we've done on the podcast and what I'm working towards life-wise, he helps me make the strategic decisions. And he's usually who I text or call when I'm dealing with a strategic decision. So I'm a little biased to Dan. And a lot of his experience, because he's 72, 73 years old, comes from Dan having to reassess his life in about my age, in his early 50s, and change the course and the quality of a lot of the decisions that he was making. And that literally changed the trajectory of his life in amazing ways. And that was where the New York Times bestseller, 48 Days to the Work You Love, was born out of. And his book is a lot about how to get out of a career that you're stuck in to find work that you love. But there's a lot of practical application within the book from a conceptual standpoint to creating a life in retirement, because it forces you to re-examine some things. And so we're going to chat with Dan here on the show to think a little bit strategically. And then in the clubhouse, in the Rock Retirement Club, and you can check that out at rockretirementclub.com, because we'd love you to join us if you think this is something that's right for you. Happy to give you a tour. He's going to join us for a special event within the clubhouse. And then one of our mutual friends in September is actually going to go through a workshop for club members where we take it over a few weeks, step by step, to re-examining some things so we can have an overarching strategy of what we're trying to accomplish here. So I'm a big Dan fan, and I hope you are too. So let's have a chat with Dan Miller. So Dan, I want to focus on the addition that I saw on the cover, 48 Days to the Work and Life You Love. So why did you add that?
You know, that book has been out for 20 years and it's been 48 Days to the Work You Love. And that's certainly kind of the focus. But more and more we realize work is just one tool for a successful life. It's a successful life people want. If work allows them to do that, then work is fine. But we don't want people to plan their life around their work. We want it to be reversed. So I just thought it was time to include that. I've always had the wheel of life in there. We look at 7 different areas of life, recognizing they need to be equally as important as work. So it was time to bring it to the cover. Work and life you love.
I think it's smart. I've used your work in the book and repurposed it for the people that listen to this show and the people in the Rock Retirement Club that are transitioning from career to retirement, whatever that is, because it's applicable. It is about creating a great life. And so my question to you is, and I'm sure you deal with this with people that are having in careers and trying to transition, but typically when somebody's retiring or leaving their full-time work, they have been institutionalized. I always use the example of Shawshank Redemption and the character, what was his name? What was the actor's name either? Morgan Freeman that plays the older. And when he gets out to the halfway house, he has been institutionalized in the prison. And a lot of people have been institutionalized into what their value is, what their identity is, and sometimes struggle with, okay, what do I do when I get out? And I think your book helps with that. Is that something you see people struggle with even in mid-career?
Oh, yeah, it really is. And Charles Dickens told a story about a guy who was in prison there for 20 years and then got his release. And he walked out, spent about 5 minutes in the sunshine, turned around and walked back in. It was just too much to handle, the change. We tend to get used to the status quo, even if it's not to our best advantage. So taking the initiative to look for something that would be a next season, even if we anticipate things can be better, is challenging. We tend to just be kind of comfortable with what is familiar. Nothing wrong with that, but I like to encourage people to initiate that change. And right now we're seeing people who had an unwelcome and unexpected change. But you know what's happening right now? A lot of people are saying, wow, there are other options. from what I had. I'm hearing from pastors of churches who are saying, I thought I was secure. Things would always be the same. And now I discover, no, how can I continue doing something meaningful, even if I'm not standing behind a pulpit with people in the pews on Sunday? So these changes that come unexpectedly are often really good stimulators for helping us figure things out that are better, more exciting, and oftentimes more profitable.
And I think of them as triggers right now with the COVID disruption and the uncertainty in the workplace. People are feeling at risk, and that becomes a trigger. If you get laid off unexpectedly or you get a package unexpectedly, it feels like a bad thing, but really it's sort of the push that the parent needs to give sometimes to get the kid to go. I think back in my life, every horrible thing that's happened in my life that caused me to deal with something that I had delayed dealing with I look back in hindsight and think of it as the best thing that ever happened to me. I know you have stories like that, but
I hear that from people a lot who lose their job, which is traumatic. And they immediately think, okay, we're not going to go on vacation. We're going to turn the car back in. We're going to pull our kids out of private school. And then I talk to them 18 months later and they say, oh my gosh, it's the best thing that ever happened because it forced me to look at new options. And I'm in a way better place than I was then.
And one thing I see that, and I hear a lot with this audience and in the club is they financially have, quote unquote, won the game or have done well, but they continue to work simply out of this sort of delay. I'm comfortable with the rat race because I know and I get my value in it. And so these decisions, and they end up looking back and saying, man, I should have retired 3 or 4 years ago, because these decisions to be intentional can be delayed forever. And when I look at your book, and you explain the 48 in your book, but I want to ask you, because you've explained it differently to me from the sense of a timeline and a deadline. So what is important about the 48 days in terms of making decisions?
Well, I'd love to tell you it was some scientifically derived number after years of study and calculations, but it's not. You know me well. I'm way more impulsive and spontaneous than that. So I used that years ago in working with people who were frustrated with their current situation. And we'd work together and map out a plan of action. So here's what to do. And then I'd run into them a year later and they hadn't done anything. They're waiting till the kids graduate, or they get another degree, or they finish paying off the mortgage, or whatever it is, and they hadn't taken any action. And I thought, well, this is nuts. If people are really unhappy with their current situation, there needs to be a timeline. So it's not just when all the lights are green, but it's a timeline. So I used 48. Now, this was back when 48 Hours was becoming popular as a TV show. I simply borrowed what I thought I could use as a little marketing branding bump by using a number that was not just a common round number. It's not 30, 60, 90, 120, which are real common, don't get our attention, but 48. And as soon as I started using 48, I mean, it was like somebody threw gasoline on everything I was doing. People said, you mean I really can change my life in 48 days? And my answer then and now, yes, you can, if you create a plan and act on it. Not just getting more information, but create a plan and execute. But 48 days is enough time to assess, where am I? Get the advice and opinion of other people. Narrow down my options to 3 or 4. Do a little bit more research. Choose the best one and act. And that can have to do with where you're going to live, where you're going to send the kids to college, what you're going to do to start a business, next career, whatever. So it has worked wonderfully. And I work with people willingly. But, you know, if we hit day 48 or 49 and the person is still where they were at the beginning, when that's fine, I'll still love you as a friend. Man, I'm moving on because I work with people who take action in that confined period of time.
I think that's really cool in the way that it came about, because none of this ends up being scientific. It's 48 days is simply a constraint that makes them move forward. Because I imagine on that 49th day, if they've made massive progress, there's nothing magical about the 48. You just want to see progress and people moving forward.
Absolutely.
And that gives them the framework, because otherwise, if you don't have a constraint in making the decision, it's easy just to forget about it and move on.
Oh, and you create your own version of Groundhog Day. One day becomes the same version as the day before. And all of a sudden, months and years have gone by. I worked with a guy one time who told me that he had taken a job, just a temporary job at a bank, just to fill in while he tried to really figure things out. That was 14 years ago. 14 years passed, And he never made a move out of that temporary position to just give him a transition vehicle. People do it all the time.
I remember my wife's constraint when we were in our 20s was she wanted to have children before 30. And we did. We had one before 30, one right at 30. But even that sort of sets a structure of progress. So you don't wake up and you're the same person. In the course in the club, we sort of approach it from a different way. And I imagine you see this a lot is there are normal regrets at the end of life. I wish I would have lived a life truer to myself. I wish I would have stayed connected to friends and so on. And being intentional, and if 48 helps you be intentional, you could go the other way. And you don't want to be the guy who, when he wakes up at 65 or 70 and says, man, I could have done some really cool things.
Absolutely.
So constraints are important in decision-making, and decision-making is the theme of this month. One thing that people struggle with that you teased out in your book is when you're in a career, people value you for what you do, right? Your title. Titles are a thing, especially in corporate America. And then when you leave your title, whether it's to start a business on your own or do something that people don't understand, whether it's becoming a coach or a consultant or creating education, how do you deal with your identity when you leave?
Well, that's where it becomes real obvious. Your identity better not be wrapped up in just what you do. Who you are should include more than just what you do to fill the hours of the day or create income. That should always be true. If we really are identified only by the work that we do, then we're pretty vulnerable. Then if that unexpected change comes along, and one of the concepts that I like to kind of break down is the distinction between three words that we tend to use interchangeably, but they're very different. Those are vocation, career, and job. Vocation is the big picture. It's what you want to be remembered for. What is part of your legacy? And it should include your mission, purpose, destiny, calling. Those are all things that would be in that vocation. So you may want to help reduce pain and suffering in the world, as an example. Career then is a subset of that. So to fulfill that vocation, you could be a physician, a dentist, be a sports therapist, a massage therapist. You could be a politician, teacher. A lot of things would fully embrace that. Job is the smallest component. Job is just what you do daily. Now it has to embrace career and a career, the vocation. But if we frame it as such, then we can see that changing the job should never change your vocation. I work with physicians, attorneys, dentists, and pastors who say, I don't want to do this anymore. That's fine. We go back and really clarify what was their original calling, vocation. We can find new applications for that, even if it changes dramatically what they were doing daily. So we have dentists who no longer show up at a clinic in a white coat and put their hands in people's mouth. They continue validating their background experience. I have pastors. I have a beautiful painting in my office done by a former pastor. He thought he was doing something godly, but it was very clear it wasn't a good fit for him. He was trying to do something, didn't fit his natural skills. So he changed. So that's what you have to do. Your identity is not wrapped up. Your identity ought to be way more than just what you do to create an income.
I imagine, to go back to that Shawshank example, your identity is not your number on your prison uniform.
Oh my. Yes.
So does living that identity have to involve money, compensation?
No, but here's the deal. When people go into retirement, there are three things that we see get them in trouble. No friends, no money, no purpose. Now, the first two are easier to get. And we see people who have handled the money part, as you alluded to earlier. They have friends, but with no purpose, we see those people shrivel up and die in 2 years for no obvious reason other than no purpose. So it's really critical to have that. Now, money, we need money. I don't think somebody is going to be willing to face any season of their life really with no money. But there are a lot of people who don't need to accumulate more. So then it becomes a matter of stewarding well what you have. But as you know, even in the process of stewarding well, it tends to generate more. I mean, you can't serve people well without it having it generate money. And that's a cool thing. So I think people risk feeling that sense of the loss of purpose if they really just unplug even from making money. I love seeing people who don't need more for themselves. But if God has given you the ability to generate income, then I think stewarding that gift well means you continue to generate money, even if you then funnel it to other things that you care about.
In some ways, I think it can be more authentic because in so much of our life, we're worried about the money. We need the money to build our wealth and provide for our family. And when you reach that point, you don't. There's no pressure there because you figured that part out. It actually allows you to lean into the service part of it more.
I know this is a dicey topic in your community, but when I see people who say, well, I've made all the money I ever need, I don't ever have to work again, I'm thinking, wow, I personally would struggle with that. I would feel that that's a very selfish position. If I have the ability to continue generating income, what about a school in Haiti? What about helping people on the American and Indians on the reservations here? I mean, there's so many things that I could see that money helps life be better for other people. I don't ever want to get to the point where I say, okay, I've got enough for me, myself, and I'm not going to do anything to generate more.
And I think without that purpose, I always liken it to a hunting dog, like a Labrador retriever. A Labrador retriever that doesn't have a purpose, fetching the ball or fetching the birds or what have you, is destructive. They either mope around all day or they chew the drywall. And I've talked with clients and they're like, yeah, I need something to do. I can't just not do something because I'm a Labrador. I got to have a purpose. I need a job.
That's right.
That doesn't go away when you leave your career, right?
That's right. It really doesn't. I'm at a point, age-wise.
And you're in your 70s. I'm outing you. You don't care, but I know.
I'm 73. And the funny thing is, as you know, we're just in the process of moving to Florida. Well, daggone it, the fact of my age and the fact we're moving to Florida, what people assume. I'm going to go down there and sit on the front porch and drool on myself and play shuffleboard? Are you kidding me? That's not on the horizon at all. I'm going to continue doing, as a matter of fact, I'm ramping up the things that I'm doing that I most enjoy, not just to get bigger houses, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I really, Joanna and I are content with very modest things that we have, but the thrill of adventure in doing something that serves other people well and to see that expand, I hope that thrill never ends.
Yeah. And you have the time freedom to do to travel and to play. I know, because we've traveled together. So,
sure.
So this theme of this month is about decision making. So given what we've set up, what do we have to have an understanding of ourselves? And this is what your book goes through. And so let's talk briefly of the skills, what we have to identify in terms of skills, abilities, personal traits, and passions to sort of figure this out. Because a lot of people feel stuck in figuring it out.
They do. And what happens is a lot of people are used to looking for external clues, external solutions. So they got out of college and Uncle Harry was hiring down at the plant. They got a job there and put in 30 years. That's okay. But if we're used to just looking externally for solutions like that, then all of a sudden, you're 65 and you look up and it's like, well, the workplace has changed. I'm not really sure. Well, this place to start is to look inward. 85% of the process of having the confidence of proper direction comes from looking inward. So look at yourself. What are those skills and abilities that you have? Not only that you have refined in terms of having the ability to do it, but things that you really enjoy doing. And then personality tendencies. How do you relate to other people? How do you manage? How do you sell? What kind of environments are you most comfortable in? And then the third area being values, dreams, and passions. What are those things when you're involved in them, you realize you're really in your zone of genius? Things just really seem to fit. There ought to be clues. So by the time somebody's 30, there ought to be those clues. Certainly by the time somebody's 50 or 60 or 70, there's lots of clues. But it's looking at those that we then get a clear focus. All right. These things need to be integrated for me to really function at my best. So what does that look like on Monday morning? What could I do? Whether that's a volunteer activity or whether it's starting a business or showing up at an office somewhere, process is very much the same.
I imagine it could even be applied to being an amazing grandparent.
Absolutely.
Identifying, these are my skills. This is my personality trait. This is my passion, or my grandkids, and helping mentor them. I can imagine it could be expressed that way.
Oh, totally. And I have a bunch of grandkids. Guess what my conversations with them are? Hey, you really enjoy doing this. If we kind of formalize that a little bit, you could go to the farmer's market on Saturday and make $300 doing that. I have to be careful about going there too quickly to superimpose my tendency to go to entrepreneurial ideas. But my conversations are with them. We just had our granddaughter here with her boyfriend, who both just finished college. And I'm asking them, what do you want your life to look like 5 years from now? What do you see yourself doing? It's the same kind of things I use with clients in my work, but it's such a natural part of things I'm interested in. Those are the conversations I have with people I care about most.
And when I think about people leaving their institution, they're getting out and quote unquote retiring.
Yeah.
That is one of those triggers that we mentioned where hopefully they have the money part figured out. They have a good friend network, and they actually have the mental space to go through figuring out, reconnecting with your skills, abilities, personal traits, and passions, because the rush of the wheel of careers is slowing down. And that's like an opportunity to actually dive into this.
It really is. So if somebody's been a dentist, used to working long hours, 5 days a week, and now they're at their point where they don't need to do that any longer. Same thing is true. Just go back and look at those things about yourself. It'll give you clues or things you can do moving forward. We have a dentist who writing a forward for his new book, but he was born in Vietnam. He's been very successful as a dentist, but at 46, he realizes it was more his parents' dream than his, which is true often of immigrants. They had high expectations professionally for their 5 children. So he has a sister who's a dentist, a brother who's a doctor, and goes on from there. But he's not going to just walk away from that, but he's put together a community of dentists called Nifty Thrifty Dentists, helping dentists make good decisions about equipment that they need. He allows vendors to come into that community and share what they have. And then he gets commissions on all the transactions that take place. The guy's really energetic. So he would be bored if he were just doing clinical work, but he's using his background, his network, his academic training to show him new opportunities that most dentists are never going to do. And it's created a nice little cash cow for him.
Now, we have a mutual friend who is a quasi-coach in the Rock Retirement Club that was on the show just a few weeks ago talking about closing out estates, Mark Ross.
Oh.
And he's someone that comes to mind in this discussion because he is recently retired from his career in municipal management. And now he coaches and he paints. We've known him for a number of years. He's been exploring these things that you've outlined, because I know you've worked with him, and he's articulating his passions. And there's some commerce motive to it, but it's not the main motive. And he definitely...
That's right. I love Mark's life example. He retired. He has an amazing pension that he receives. He's in great shape. He doesn't have to work to generate income. But it's this whole new season of life for him, where in looking at those things that he was interested even as a kid, where he and his brother, made furniture together. Well, he likes design, art. And so now he's doing these amazing paintings.
We have one right here of the car that we saw in Cuba. He sent me a painting of one of the cars that we saw.
Oh my gosh.
You were there.
Yeah. I love that kind of expression and how he's doing things that are meaningful. So there are things that have purpose for him, even if the primary motivation is not generating income.
And the thing that I think is interesting about Mark's journey is he is not an extrovert. He's not someone that is comfortable being in center stage so much. He's very contemplative. He's very thoughtful and internal thinking, yet he's doing these things because normally we think of people that will lean into all this stuff or just people that are gregarious and quick decision makers. Mark's not a quick decision maker, but he's doing it even though he doesn't fit that sort of mold.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's where we vary in personalities like that. And that's where the 48 days is just a gentle nudge to not just be caught in indecision, taking some time to gather information is fine, and that'll vary with people. But oftentimes, people rationalize procrastination and indecision by just gathering more information and not making a decision. And of course, we can even also throw in there people, the ultimate one is people say, well, I'm praying about it. God hasn't given me clarity yet. Boy, what do you do with that? I mean, and that can go on for 10 years.
I did that when I first started the podcast. I was praying, should I be doing this? I don't want this to be about me. And I was worried about all that. And I finally came to the conclusion, dang it, Roger, God's waiting for you to act and he'll knock you on your butt when you go in the wrong direction. So just trust him.
There you go.
Now you have a lot of examples in your book, testimonials of people that have gone through your courses or listened to your great show and that have made major changes in their life. And that's one thing I like about it. It's almost like a workbook.
We had stories in there about like our mutual friend, Nick Pavlidis, an attorney, very successful attorney in New York City. Wow. He made a total life transformation, went a different direction. And you know how excited he is about the things that he's doing today.
Yeah. And he and his team are helping me write my next book.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Wonderful people. And I think that procrastination is what will cause the realization of those 5 major regrets at the end of life.
Oh my.
And we want to minimize those. So we're going to be doing a book study in the Rock Retirement Club on your book.
Oh, wonderful.
And I know you're going to join us in there, and we'll probably run it more like a workshop because there's a lot of tools to use. So it's 48 days to the work and life that you love. And we'll have links in the show notes.
Well, I'll get some ancillary materials to help lay out a study like that.
Definitely. We'll talk about that. Yeah. This is something in the club we talk about a lot. So we'll do a workshop so we can all walk it together.
All right. Awesome.
All right. Great book. You're a great man, and I'm honored to know you. Thanks for sharing.
Well, thank you, Roger. I have a landing page.
Oh, you bet.
For you here. Yeah.
All right. It's 48days.com/Roger.
Check it out.
Check it out. And we'll have it in 6 Shot Saturday and on the show notes. It's a wonderful book and you should read it.
Well, thank you so much. Great having a conversation with you.
So this is a really big show because I get to have 2 of my favorite people on the show. That's pretty amazing. So in the question and answer session, because we always want to answer your questions, I'm bringing on Fritz Gilbert from the Retirement Manifesto blog, retirementmanifesto.com. And Fritz and I are going to answer some of your questions. And a little disclaimer here, Fritz was testing out his new studio. The Wi-Fi was still a little bit wonky, and he and I just sort of got off on some tangents. So for those, Steph, Jeff, Brandon, if you don't feel like we answered your question clearly, just send me an email and I'll try to answer them for you because Fritz and I sort of go off on some tangents here, but he's always a joy to talk to. So coming to us live from his brand new studio, HQ of Retirement Manifesto, is Fritz Gilbert. Hey, Fritz, how are you, buddy?
Hey, Roger, doing great. Nice to see you. You've been my inspiration. You've got that beautiful feature wall behind you that I've always envied. So I was like, you know what? I got to try to catch up with Roger and build my own little writing studio. And I just set it up today. So I'm honored to talk with you literally hours after I've set things up. As you can see, I don't have my feature wall done yet. Obviously, we're audio, but since you can see it, I don't have the feature wall yet. But it's great to talk to you on my first day in my new office. This is exciting.
And what we do have, if not the feature wall, is a lot of wisdom from somebody who's been there, done that, and gotten the T-shirt and successfully retired, which is invaluable. So this month, we're talking about how do you make good decisions? How do you make better decisions? Do you have a process you go through when you're contemplating building a HQ or doing something else?
I have an interesting process, I guess, that is really varied based on the decisions that I'm making, from very analytical, very detailed to instinct. And it really, I adapt my approach based on what I'm facing and how serious the consequences are, obviously, if you make the wrong decision. Retirement being a huge decision, obviously, I get quite a bit more analytical. Deciding on something less significant, I tend to use more instinct and less analysis. So I do kind of flex my approach based on what I'm looking at.
So I'm curious, Fritz, what was the thought process from concept to pulling the trigger that you went through to decide to build your headquarters, which is really your man shed in the back, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's really probably a great example since I'm currently going through it. And I just went through the decision-making process. And I'm sure the thinking went on that. Obviously, as I was planning for retirement, the numbers, I had a targeted safe withdrawal rate. I was conservative. Every one of our assumptions we were conservative on. So we knew we would probably undershoot on our spending, which was where we intentionally wanted to be. Now we're 2 years into retirement, and that's been demonstrated to be the case. We're running probably less than 3% withdrawal rate, close to it. And as I started thinking about retirement and the fact that we've worked 33 years to get here, I really recognized that this is the whole dilemma of moving from saving to spend. So this was almost psychological decision in a way. It was, do we want to legitimately and truly go after those things that we know we can afford that will bring value to our lives? And it was driven by recognizing what's really bringing us value in retirement. It's my writing. It's my wife's charity. My wife's charity involves giving free fences to dogs live on chains for low-income families. We have to build dog houses. Obviously, I'm trying to build them on our porch. Doesn't work real well. So, there were some drivers that were based on strong fundamentals we knew we were going to continue for the foreseeable future that brought both of us a big sense of purpose. So we knew this was embedded in, this wasn't just materialism. This was something that we know gives us purpose and value in retirement. So it's okay to spend the money on it. So I think it was getting the psychology of turning into a bit more of a spender after being a lifelong saver. And then obviously we did the numbers, we did the math. I've been below on the safe withdrawal rate. So if we took the value of the headquarter construction and pulled it out of our net worth and looked at the revised withdrawal rate, we were still very safe. So I think it was a combination of both. But I think it's an important thing to think about in retirement is, what do you want to spend your money on, and what's the safe amount that you can spend?
So one big component of that was you got to the other side of retirement and got a baseline for what actual spending was on the other side.
Exactly. Yeah.
Rather than guessing and doing it all at once.
Exactly. And the other thing I would say is the income projection that we used when we were deciding to retire. I wanted to assume no income, obviously. If there's some side hustle income, fine. Well, obviously I've written the book. My blog's doing well. I'm on a board of directors. There's been some income that I wasn't in that favor as well. So, you know what? We've got the extra income. We know what's bringing us pure, real passion environment. It's okay to spend money on things that really bring value to your life.
Okay, great.
And the last thing I should probably say, when I think about the decision-making process, the other thing we looked at was it's not necessarily all money that's just being spent, because it's going to add significant resale. You can be 100 in your investment back when you do the sell at some point. Who knows? But regardless, it's not all just being spent. It's kind of being moved right from a cash bucket to a real estate bucket. And some of that will come back if we ever decide to move and downsize or, do something else in the future. It's not like it's totally being spent. It's being invested in a different form. So
yeah, and the return calculation actually has two components. From one, it helps enhance the value, but not fully relative to dollars spent. And then the other return is the enjoyment while you're there.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. And, there's some intangibles to both of those. But I think every decision has the intangibles as well as the tangibles. And I think you have to factor the intangibles in somehow, right? You can't necessarily put them in a spreadsheet, but you've got to factor those into your decision making. And it was a big element in this spending decision.
Yeah, that's definitely a harder one to factor in. I always talk to people when they're moving towards where you're at is, when they're thinking about their living environment, is thinking about ways to use their capital safely to create the atmosphere that they would really enjoy, one, and two, how they can use their capital to take away friction in their life.
Yep.
Right. Which go to what you're talking about.
Yep. Agree with both of those. Yep.
Great. Well, let's dive into a few questions. The first one, real easy one. It's just, I promised Steph that I would answer that. She listens to the disclaimer at the end of the show. God bless her. And everybody, I think, is happy I moved it to the end because I didn't for a long time. She got a little confused at what Nicole said. She thought she heard her say, "God love it if you took advice from us." But you seemed to say, "We would not love it if you took advice from us." And so she was puzzled. And the correct answer, Steph, is Nicole says, "We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show." So we've cleared up that mystery.
Now, can I say, Roger, I've listened to your podcast for 7 or 8 years. And even when you had on the front of the show, you know that little, at least on the podcast listener audio, you've got that little arrow that you can jump forward like 15 seconds. Okay, that's a 2 or 3 click bounce. I knew how long it was, and I'd always click through it. So I hate to say it. I don't think I've ever listened to your disclaimer. Maybe when you made the new disclaimer and you were talking about, hey, I got a new disclaimer. Okay, I might have listened to it one time, but that was it. I hate to tell you that.
That's fine. That's fine. I took it as a challenge for a year or two to try to make it different. And I think I wrapped it once, and I've done a lot of things, and I think that's all run its course. I think probably for the good. So we have 2 questions today that are very similar. And first off, the first one's from Jeff, but both of them, and I know I shared them with you, Fritz.
Yeah.
I'm always amazed at the depth of information in people's questions. So Jeff's question is about unplanned early retirement. And I'm summarizing about 4 or 5 paragraphs of information and context from Jeff. I think that sort of goes to how important decisions that people grapple with are, and how when you're on your own, or even if you're working with something, how it's confusing and looking for some context of how to make this decision. So let me summarize Jeff's question on planned early retirement. So they're age 51, they're debt-free, their net worth is about $3 million. And he believes that they could retire as early as this year, either by choice to try to get some time freedom because they're tired. I mean, literally it says, I'm tired. Or because of obviously everything going on with the economy, most likely the firm is going to have some consolidation or contraction. And they're concerned about not having everything in order for next year. And he said roughly their budget's about $12,000 a month. And so it looks to me like, and he's willing to work, or he and his wife are willing to work, but they don't feel like they've been accumulating, but they don't really feel like they're prepared if this happens, or if they decide it to happen, and they're not sure if they have enough. So how would you approach a problem like this?
Yeah. And what I did, Roger, I took the question, and I guess my go-to, especially when you get into financial questions, it's kind of like, I think back to when you're in school and you've got a train that leaves Detroit going 35 miles an hour and a train leaving Chicago going 57, at what point do they meet, right? You can't do that stuff in your head. To me, this is kind of the same. And to me, I've got a very simple process that I use. I did it for both of these questions we'll go through today. And I'll be honest, I started about 30 minutes before you and I hooked up here today. So it doesn't take long. It's very high level. It's not the level of detail I would do to give a final answer as a planner, but I think you've got to put things down in a spreadsheet. This is my preference. You know me, I'm a spreadsheet geek, but I can't make a decision in a scenario involving these kind of numbers and these numbers of variables without doing some formulas and some math, right? So I took those paragraphs that you just summarized, and I basically put them into categories, right? How much assets do they have? The one big factor in his decision was they've got $1.3 million in their house. And there was some question about whether they were going to be willing to move or not, right? So you've got to look at the assets that the person has, and you have to be able to do the math. Well, what if we sell the house? What if we don't? So I basically build up the net worth, and then I do some scenarios around the spending against the, let's call it the more liquid assets, to get a really quick sense of, are they close to being able to make it, or have they got a bit of a problem? That's kind of how I go about these types of scenarios.
Oh, and I think you're right. Essentially, you build a cash flow model.
Yeah.
And it sounds more intimidating than it really needs to be. So as an example, Jeff, and I failed to bring up the part about the house because they live in a $1 million house and they may have to sell it to unleash some of the value, and they're willing to consider it. But you're right. You have to build a cash flow model to map out spending year by year, and then look at whatever income sources you have year by year. Because then you can start, once you have the cash flow model built, then you can start playing with, well, what if I have what if I make $30,000 a year doing something for 10 years?
Right.
Then you can start to do the what if analysis, comparing keeping the house and then adjusting your cash flow and your net worth if you sell the house. Because if you do
and again, I did 2 questions in 30 minutes. So you're right. It doesn't have to be complicated. To get a high level picture, I did this in 15 minutes. And, I come up with, assuming you don't include the home equity, which says they decide not to sell and they stay where they're at, and assuming his roughly $120,000 post-retirement spending budget is right, they've got a bit of an issue because they're at 6% withdrawal rate, right? You can look at it that quickly and get a sense of, are we close? Does it take a lot more analysis? Or you can do that in about 15 minutes. And I'm not a wizard at this stuff. I do very basic formulas, and you can get pretty high level direction. Like you said, it's not that complicated. Now, if you want to really get into year by year, all the way out to age 95, which I did for our retirement, I've got a spreadsheet available on the Retirement Manifesto. Listeners can borrow, it's free. It's on my resources page. And I've done that level of detail, but you don't necessarily have to do that level of detail for every decision you're making.
That's where the 4% rule that is so popular is helpful. It's a rule of thumb to help you identify, just sort of putting your finger up in the air. Is this a safe or is this not? Like I did the calculation. I assume they sell their house and they unleash $500,000 and it comes out to about a 5.7% withdrawal rate.
Yeah.
In my practice, we think of things as you're underfunded, you're constrained, underfunded, you don't have enough money for the life, you're constrained. It could work, but it might not, or it might, depending on how the world unfolds, or you're overfunded. And this would be in the very constrained category.
Yeah. And I think the other thing it looks at, if you read through the detail, which we don't need to get into it, but, everybody's got decisions to make and the kids love the schools they're in, but, they're private schools, they're expensive, and they're looking at 8 years of having to make double payments for both kids and then another 2 years after that. So they've got, 10 years of education spending, assuming they pay for college. Those levers are, if you really are getting forced into early retirement because of COVID or some other reason, you do have to make some hard decisions. If you're looking at a 5.7, your number, 6%, my number, a dangerous withdrawal rate, I think the decision-making starts coming, okay, do I have to find another job to keep the spending we're doing? Or do we sell the house? Or do we consider potentially a lifestyle change and stop the private school?
Well, and this is where, and I made a note on the house and the private school, is it sounds like, and we don't know, $1 million house is nothing in California and it's everything in Texas, right? So I don't know where Jeff lives, but a lot of times where we get ourselves stuck is when we build our lifestyle around our income. And in Jeff's case, I don't know if that's the case or not, but they still were able to save a lot, even with the private school and the nice house and everything else. So bravo. But then you come to, if you choose to retire, well, everything changes and you have to rethink a lot of the choices you made around the house and school, and getting kids through the private school or through college is sometimes a benchmark people use because then that expense goes away, of reorganizing your life around the new season of life that you're going into. And in your case, Jeff, you have two things. One is, do I choose to retire? Well, I think the fact that you're asking this question the way it is, I'd say no, until you've worked through a cash flow model and have more detail about what you want to do with the house, how this actually all works. So I would say there's more work to be done there to figure that out. And Fritz has a free spreadsheet in the Rock Retirement Club in our class. We have a spreadsheet where we work through how to build the cash flow model. And then the second issue is, well, what happens if it's forced upon you?
Yeah.
Which a lot of people are finding that, it's on the radar for some people more than others. And there you have to think of, what can I do now to either protect myself against that company contraction, and that could be working, networking, making yourself more visible, really trying to help the company even more than you are now to make you indispensable. It could be networking in your industry or in other areas that you'd want to go. So you have a fresher network that you need to access it and use it, and or positioning yourself. Since it sounds like retirement's on your mind, start thinking of, okay, how do we redesign our life? Because if it isn't going to be this year, it sounds like we would prefer to have it in the next few years. So let's, as a family, talk through the house. Let's talk through private school and decide whether this is really how we want things structured. I think back to, Fritz, when we had our children. I'm not proud of this story, but I learned a lot from it. I was fairly successful in my 20s, and Sean and I were married. So we built this big custom house because everything can only be better. And then we had 2 children, and my wife left work to raise the children. So now we're one income. And then I left one firm to go to another firm. And we were in a we had structured our life around my ego and the fact that this money would be going, and my income peak to trough went down by 70-80%. Right. And we navigated that through selling the beautiful home, moving an hour away to be within a mile or so from my wife's twin and my wife's mother-in-law. And we live in that area today. So we redesigned our life around family, bought a house roughly the same size, but significantly less money, and right-sized thing. And in hindsight, I had to eat, and I'm not saying this is you, Jeff, I'm just my story. I had to come to grips with my own ego and what I thought was important and matured more that way. But we all have those kind of decisions to make. So hopefully that's helpful as you go through this.
One other thing I'd add, Roger, you're right. I mean, it is all about decisions. There's a lot of levers you can pull, but a bit of a minutia. But one thing that people need to look at too, we talk about, hey, he's got $3 million net worth. Good for him. But if you look at how much of it's actually liquid, they've only got $200,000 after tax. So, you've got to factor in, how are you going to get access to that money? Now, he's got some capital in the business that's going to get paid out. He'd have to work through that. That would obviously become potentially after tax, but it wouldn't be the same amount. Obviously, it would be reduced by the tax burden. But make sure you're not just looking at your total net worth. Make sure you're thinking about accessing those funds. And in this case, I think there's a bit of a gap there potentially of being able to, especially since they're only 51. They've got a ways to go before they can get some of those pre-tax monies.
Yeah, it'd be difficult too. And a part of that too, and I had it in my notes and I didn't mention it, is the younger you are, and you're 51, so you're a really young person, because I'm 53 and I'm young, the longer timeline you have to plan for. So that's inflation risk, that's market risk, that's spending risk, that's all sorts of things. I am a big proponent of, if you just rely on your assets, every dollar you spend has just lost its entire time value of money of what it could have been done in terms of opportunity cost from an investment in portfolio or what have you. And that's the value. And you've lost a lot of optionality, because if you're out of the workforce for 3 or 4 years because you think the numbers work and life hits you and you realize you have to go back into the workforce, you're atrophied, right? Your networks are stale, your skill sets are a little antiquated. You got to get back into the game. Whereas even if you're working part-time doing something or consulting or even something outside your industry, you're still moving forward, and every income, that $20,000 you earn, say in pre-retirement income, just doing something, doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it is. One, because there's some optionality in there of being able to dial it up and down. It allows $20,000 to be invested for another 40 years potentially each year. So it's more multidimensional than we think.
Yeah.
All right. So our next question, which is actually very similar, different fact set, and let's see if I can summarize it and not miss everything or miss anything. And again, this is detailed, and you can't see it. I shared it with Fritz, but I appreciate the detail. It does help, and I try to consolidate it to use it as hopefully to give you some wisdom, but also to help others without sharing too much detail. And the summary is, post-tax, they have about $360,000. Pre-tax, they have about $1.3 million. And then they have a pension that has an inherent value of $300,000. That could be a pension. About 175 or 190 in Roth, and then some 529 plans. And they're, I forget how old they are. 47. So they're young. And I like that they're thinking about these questions right now, Fritz. So the first one is, should we stop any pre-tax retirement account savings and invest the money in after-tax and or Roths, since they're so heavy in pre-tax assets?
Yeah. And again, I did a very simple cash flow projection on this one, Roger. And their spending is quite a bit lower than the first case study. Their spending is $50,000, and they've got after-tax monies already of $360,000, and they've got the pension. So because of the lower spending, because of the pension, they've also got some real estate income. So this gets to your point about, if you kind of do that pre-retirement thing, and let's just assume their real estate income is kind of a proxy for that, that greatly reduces the amount of money they've got to pull from their investments. So with $360,000 in post-tax, $50,000 in spending, and $20,000 in real estate income, guess what? They're pretty comfortable from a safe withdrawal rate standpoint. And my view, when you're thinking about tax planning, it's a big topic. We're not going to get into it now, right? But I think the more you can get into Roth and post-tax as you get close to retirement. It's really nice to have. They got $1 million in an IRA. I've got the same problem. We've got over half of our net worth tied up in pre-tax. That's really troublesome once you get into retirement. We're doing the Roth conversions every year. We're doing the things we can do. But if you've got an opportunity, and what I would suggest is look at your marginal tax bracket and see how much room, if you suddenly put all of your pre-tax contributions into a Roth, would that trigger you into the next higher tax bracket? In which case, no, don't do it. If it doesn't change your tax bracket and you're in a manageable tax bracket as it is, because of the new tax laws, you're only paying 24% marginal tax rate up to like $380,000. So it's not outrageous to think about contributing to a Roth, even though you're in your potentially peak earning years, given the tax structure that we're facing right now and what you might potentially face down the road. So it's a complicated topic, but I don't think it's unrealistic to think about it in their situation, at least for that question.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm 53, and about 3 or 4 years ago, I did that.
Yep.
I slowed down my pre-tax saving and increased my after-tax in Roth.
Yep. I did the same thing when I was in my mid-50s, early 50s, getting closer to retirement. And you take the tax hit now to give yourself some diversification in your portfolio, tax structure diversification once you get into retirement. That's really valuable to have.
And if it helps give you permission, Brandon, on this, you won't get this right. You will not optimize this correctly. And because we're dealing with such incomplete information, a lot of this has to do with our view on taxes and our view on your income in the future. We do know that IRA, especially at your age, is going to grow tax deferred and basically increase your eventual RMDs. We know that's going to happen. So I do like the idea of starting to save in after-tax or Roth. Now, one thing you can do too is if you're still working anyway, or even if you're self-employed, is you want to at least get the match of the employer and look for Roth 401k options with the employer because you can get a lot more in there. And then if you do retire early, and you guys are in your 40s and you're talking about retirement, which is awesome, consider doing some pre-retirement, some kind of work, or even better from a saving standpoint, some self-employment work so you can still get credits for Social Security. And you can save, whether it's in a solo 401k or in some other, solo 401k would be the best one in terms of getting even more money into the Roth. So I like that. And then the second question is, what are your suggestions on asset location? We sort of talked about that in terms of it's good to have those 3 buckets, after tax, pre-tax, tax-free, as balanced as you can get them. But there's no formulaic way of doing it. And then the last part of that question, Fritz, on the 5-year ladder strategy. Do you have any comment on that? I'll read that one.
Yeah, I guess.
Let me read it real quickly.
Sorry, I was going to go back to the email. Go ahead.
Yeah, so they say they're planning to use their savings and brokerage accounts to cover annual expenses and pay the taxes on the conversions to help bridge the gap until we have access in 5 years to our ladder strategy.
I'm looking at their email. Is that question 2? The second part of question 2?
Yeah, second part of question 2.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking down for. I don't do that question. I'm sorry. I was looking for that while you were talking. Okay, so the Roth conversion ladder strategy. Let me talk about the way I'm doing that. And I think this is what he's saying. As I mentioned, in his case as well, they've got a lot of money in pre-tax, as do I. And every year I'm converting up to the top of my current marginal tax bracket. I'm considering going even up to the top of the 24% marginal tax bracket, believe it or not, doing a big couple of years of conversions to really knock down the RMDs when, if the tax rates are higher. I do think it really makes a lot of sense in the current tax structure to convert as much of that stuff into the Roth once you retire and that income comes down as you possibly can. It's kind of the golden era right now for Roth conversions in my view. So if that's what he's talking about, which I assume he is, I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree in principle in the sense, Brandon, that as soon as you have low income and you can actually control the realization of income, and so let's say you have a deficit of $50,000 a year that you need to fund for your life. And you could take it from after-tax assets, you could take it from tax-free assets, or you could take it from pre-tax assets, which really isn't necessarily the case for you because of your age. But let's say you have $20,000 in income next year, the first year of retirement. Well, the top of the 12% bracket with standard deduction for married couples is right around $100,000. And so each year, it would be a shame to waste that paying 12% to do the conversion. You pay 12% of the tax on every conversion, because if you don't do it in year one, you're not going to be able to do it in year two and catch up. You're just going to have each year. So I'm a big fan of either taking money from pre-tax assets, if you're old enough to be able to, or converting at least up to the 12% bracket, which is about $100,000 in realized income.
Yeah.
Because that's cheap. And that goes away. Well, the brackets as of now convert or revert back to the old brackets in 2025. As of now, anyway, you'll go up the brackets quicker, and we don't know what policy risk there is. So I'm a big fan of that, for sure. Now, here's the advisor part in me, Fritz. I'm a big fan of that, assuming that you had a process that created a comprehensive strategy of how you're going to pay for your life. And then that's a tactical thing that you decide at the end of the whole process.
Agreed.
And your answer on the question prior. So what is your suggestions when it comes to the use and distribution of their pension plan? Do we go with lump sum, pay the taxes, and then use the remainder to help Roth conversions, or do we take the pension? So let me go over the pension real quickly. And I'm just going to use one of them as an example. Let's assume they took it in July of 2021. The question is, I just had a similar question earlier today. I have $315,000 as a lump sum, or I can get $857 a month for life.
Yeah.
So that's a very common decision that people have to make. So do you have any way that you would approach that? I know how I would approach it, but
the way I always look at this, and I've not done it, but again, this topic is really around how do you go about making decisions. So what I would do if this situation were presented to me, I would look at like an annuity calculator, and I would say, okay, how much of an annuity stream could I buy for that $315,000? And I would compare that to right now, to refresh what you said, he can either get a lump sum of $315,000 or a monthly paycheck of $857 for life. So if you take that $315,000, invest it in an immediate annuity that'll pay income for life. Normally, when you're looking at these lump sum payout scenarios, the taking a lump sum, buying an annuity comes out lower than the monthly payout option that they're giving you. I have not done it for this case, so I can't speak to this one in particular. So normally, that's the way I would look at it. And it normally says you're better off taking the annuity, the pension as a lifelong annuity rather than a lump sum. The disclaimer to that is if you're concerned about the financial longevity of your company, et cetera, there can be some risks to that income stream since it's dependent on your employer. But that's normally how I would look at that decision.
So like if we do the simple math and we take, that's what, $10,284 a year, and we divide that by the $315,000 lump sum, right? So let's just do the math right here. That's a 3.2% payout, which is actually really low. Usually pensions are going to show, in my experience, 6 or 7% payout relative to the lump sum. So just from a observation here, it sort of leans more towards the lump sum in this instance. Mm-hmm. There's a calculator, and you go to calculator.net where you can put in your age, you can put in the lump sum amount and put in a 5% return. And then you can compare that to the monthly pension with zero cost of living adjustment. And it will calculate. And in that case, I'm looking at the calculator right now. It shows that the lump sum in this instance seems to make more sense.
There you go. That's exactly the right way to do it. Yeah.
So hopefully that's helpful. Let's see. Do we
the other thing, Roger, let's touch on this. I don't think he brought it up, but this is a common question that I've gotten from some of my readers. They've also got a timing decision on when to take the pension. If they take it in March, they get $296. If they wait till July, they get $315. If they wait till the next, what I do in a case like that is I look at how much of an increase are they offering for the amount of time that you'd have to stick around and work. And I look at that as an annualized rate of return. And if I did my math right, again, I did this kind of quickly, but going from $296,000 in March to $315,000 in July, that's only 4 months. It's a 6% increase in 4 months, which is a 19% annualized rate of return. Man, stick around till July, right? I mean, that's the way I typically look at those. How long should I wait? And a lot of times you see these pensions are really back-end loaded, and I think of it as the shape of a curve. The payouts increase dramatically as you get further into your career. And a lot of times, if you have the option, kind of working that one more year, things like that, the increases in those pensions can be pretty staggering. And if I did my math right, it looks like this might be one of those situations.
Yeah, what Fritz is referring to, because he and I are looking at the email, in the question. And so Brandon had given us a couple different retirement dates. March 1st of 2021, the lump sum was 296. July 1st, 2021, it was 315. I'm assuming they got that from the pension or the HR department. And so, yeah, those timing things, if you can get that data, and another place where that can come into play, Fritz, that I've experienced anyway, is some pensions will allow you to delay making a decision and letting the pension and lump sum accrue after you retire.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more rare. I have one instance where we proactively chose not to take the pension or the lump sum because it's accruing at a rate that's pretty attractive, and then we can make that decision later on.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to leave it there for now because these have been complicated questions.
Yeah.
You're welcome, by the way, Fritz. And
I got to tell the listeners this. Roger sends me this email or text yesterday and says, "Hey, you want to come on my show? I'm doing these little Q&A things, and obviously everybody knows that you're running solo this week." So I was like, "Sure, I'll help out." And then I get this email. I was like, "Oh my gosh, these are complicated."
I sent you two big questions. Brandon and Jeff gave us literally, it would be a page if I printed it out, which is awesome because it definitely gives a lot of context, but it makes it a little bit difficult to navigate in sharing it on the show. And hopefully you as the listener are not totally confused by what we're talking about. But I think even if it was confusing, I think the big message is, and I'll share my thought and you tell me yours if it's different, is there are a lot of decisions to make in retirement. And a lot of them are tactical. Do I retire this month or that month? Do I take the pension or the lump sum? Do I roll over my 401k or do I leave it? There are a lot of tactical decisions, and that's what we're talking about is usually the tactical decision that you're presented is the trigger to go figure it out. But you always have to stop when you want to make a decision. The first thing you do is not go Google that tactical decision. What you really need to do is have a process that creates a bigger strategy that will lead to the tactical decisions. And that's what we're trying to build this month. Because if you do it that way, rather than on the trigger, the tactical decisions become much more self-evident. If you build the cash flow model and think about your spending and dial those numbers in, then it becomes much easier to make these other decisions.
Yeah. Which is funny, I think that both you and I, again, the topic is more broadly, how do you go about making decisions? But it's interesting that without talking to each other in advance, both of us kind of went to that cash flow model type of mentality because you can't answer these types of retirement tactical questions without understanding how those things look in a broader perspective. And that is the cash flow model. For retirement planning, I don't know how you can do it without some type of format or hire a professional, hire Roger, but that piece of it has to be done to put all this into context. And it kind of makes the decisions, it almost makes them for you because
it does.
As you change those levers, you see which one plays out the best.
It does. And it really does make them for you, or it gives you context to basically make your best guess.
Yeah.
Because we're always making all of these decisions with very incomplete information. And so next week when we have Annie Duke on, like this week we had Dan Miller, and it was about a bigger strategy of your identifying your why and what you want your life to be. Next week, we're going to have Annie Duke and really talk about how do you make a tactical decision. So I'm excited for that. And Fritz, I'm excited that you are here. The Retirement Manifesto is an amazing blog. I love having you in the Rock Retirement Club and love having you as a friend.
Well, thank you very much, Roger. We got to tell the story. We do every time we talk. I think I've been on your show 3 or 4 times now, but way back when I hadn't started a blog, I was probably 6 years from retirement, and I started listening to you, and I just connected with you years ago. And then it's really interesting how our relationship has grown. And we did the, Can Carl Retire series together. And who would have thought that it would turn into this? And I really do value our friendship. And more than that, I value that beautiful feature wall behind you. And I've got feature wall envy. So I got to get busy here in the new studio. And,
yeah. And so
thank you very much for having me on the show, though.
So if you want to hear Mr. Retirement Manifesto before he was Mr. Retirement Manifesto, what he was referring to is we do live case studies with listeners periodically, and he was the first. And it was actually his idea. He reached out about doing a blog about it, and I said, well, why don't we do a whole case study and have it on the show? So it was Can Carl Retire? Because Fritz was in the closet. We were protecting his identity, and he's since come out. But it was right around episode 45. So if you go back in the archives, you can listen to the whole series. And then on RogerWhitney.com, we actually have the live results webinar where Fritz and I go through the analysis and think through some decisions. So it's actually, I haven't watched that in a long time. It might be interesting to watch it just to see.
Yeah, I would. I should go back and look at it now that I'm a couple years into retirement, because that was probably 4 years before I was retiring or something. It'd be interesting to go back and say, hey, how close were we? I haven't taken the time either. But
it was six. It was December 2014.
There you go. And I retired in July of 18. So it was 4 years roughly. Yeah, incredible.
All right, buddy. Thanks for joining us. Hey. And I appreciate your insight.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a little baby step that we can do in this next 7 days to create a great life and rock retirement. So in the next 7 days, I want you to examine how you have some things organized, some of the decisions that you've made, and self-assess a little bit. Do you have a set of decisions that make a cohesive strategy, or do you not? Regardless of what the answer is, that's okay. Because going forward, it will give you more information so we can slow down a little bit on our decision making. And if we have a tactical decision, to make sure we revisit what it is we want to try to accomplish. And we'll work on how you do that next episode, just with you and I chatting. Just a quick announcement on this Rock Retirement Club, which you can find out at rockretirementclub.com, is at the end of this month, we're raising the price. But if you join prior to the end of the month, you're locked in forever, regardless of what the price goes to. We'd love to see you there only if it's a fit for you. So you can check that out at rockretirementclub.com. Hey, and we hope to have Nicole back on the show soon. That would be fun. Hope you have a great day. Hey, it's time for that all-important disclaimer. We so appreciate you listening to the show and love your questions and love the teaching that we're able to provide here. And actually, it helps us too. But remember, you're not our clients.
Not love it if you took advice from us on the show.
We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show. Realize this is helpful in education. Talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before you make any decisions.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.